Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you again for joining. This is the fourth lecture of our Ramadan series in 2020. My name is Ahsaan Rizvi. I'm very happy again to join you guys. Today's topic will be about somewhat linked to what we discussed yesterday. Yesterday, obviously, we talked about the concept of ghaiba, what it means to be in ghaiba, and what is our belief in ghaiba, and we will actually link our discussion to where we left off yesterday. But before we do that, let me do a quick recap of what we did yesterday. Um, so the topic that we were talking about yesterday was ghaiba. Ghaiba simply means, literally means, it's concealed or hidden. If someone is hidden from the naked eye, we say that that person is supposed to be in ghaiba. Um, there was a verse that we also read from the Holy Quran, and it mentioned that people who are actually closer to Allah, people who are conscious of Allah, one of their characteristics is that they actually believe in the unseen. They believe in the ghaiba. And we remember from our discussion yesterday that when Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, our sixth Imam, was asked this question about what that the word ghaiba mean in that context, he actually responded to it by saying that the unseen meant or referred to in this verse to our 12th Imam, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. Thus, we actually concluded that the belief in Imam Mahdi, he is the awaited savior, is essential and critical. It has been mentioned in the Holy Quran as well as been told to us by our Imams and the Holy Prophet. So, there were two ghaibats. Imam Mahdi alayhi salam actually disappeared twice, and we termed them as ghaibat sughra and ghaibat kubra. We went over the differences between the two. We also went over the importance of ghaibat sughra. Why was it really needed? I'm going to quickly just recap and refresh your memory on that as well. Ghaibat sughra actually was of 69 years. Imam Mahdi had four companions or naib who would represent him to the public. Um, and the second ghaibat or disappearance, which is ghaibat al-kubra, uh, actually is started from the day when Imam Mahdi's father, our 11th Imam, Imam Hassan Askari alayhi salam, was martyred through poison by the tyrant ruler of that time named Motamid. Now, this Ghaibat al-Kubra still exists. Obviously, the Imam is in Ghaiba right now. There are no companions of the Imam Mahdi alayhi salam in Ghaibat al-Kubra, and these are some of the differences. So basically, the followers of Imam Mahdi are supposed to seek guidance in worldly or religious affairs through ulamas and scholars. Um, and basically, the prime reason of Ghaibat al-Sughra was to teach the followers of Imam Mahdi that they should be seeking that support, that guidance from the representatives of Imam Mahdi in his absence. And then we also went over how to remember and connect with our Imam of our time, which is the 12th Imam. We discussed the traditional, or one of the ways to connect Imam was through writing an arita. Just a special way of writing a letter. We entrust that letter through to one of his knives, and then we write our hajat or our wishes or our desires on that letter, and then we can either bury it under the soil or actually yeah, let it float on running water. So these are some of the ways we can connect with our imam, and because this is the holy month of Ramadan, it has quite a few blessings, and it is one of the biggest opportunity throughout the year for us to actually enhance our spirituality, um, to reinforce our belief in ghaiba, and to increase our ability to connect with the imam of our time is all the more critical. It's important for us to actually make use of the time in this month and do all these things, and inshallah gain proximity to Allah. Today's topic, as I said, would somehow connect with this. So we now know that ghaiba is one of the foundational concepts of our deen, of our religion. So I wanted to talk about the existence of an independent being, or an existence of a being that is responsible for our sustainability. So so basically two things that we are trying to get at, and I'm not sure if we will be able to cover both of them, but let's start with this. We want to build a framework to study that existence. So first, we'll try to build a framework where we can actually understand how many types of beings could there be, whether they exist or not, what are the characteristics of those beings. We can obviously define, as we are building our framework, we can define those characteristics of those beings as well. And then we can go, as we are evolving our understanding, we can validate them or invalidate them. So we will start with a hypothesis, and we'll try to prove it or disprove it. And this is how we are going to be able to enhance our understanding. And then obviously to explore existence of God, whether God exists or not. Like, is it logical? Is it intrinsic or not? How can that be? Um, how can that be understood? Now, the belief, as we already know, why I chose this topic was it is important for us to already believe in ghaiba, but then to understand and to study the concept of existence of God is also important. Why? Because our belief will have a lot of implications, and some of them are listed on the screen that you can see right now. Um, it affects your view of life here on Earth. So whether or not you believe will determine how you behave with other people, how you treat yourself, how you think about things. For example, if someone, and obviously it pertains to point number two, it determines how you live your life, right? If you do not believe in an independent, all-powerful, omnipotent, omnipresence being, and if you think that there is no afterlife or hereafter, then your mindset could be that you can do anything in this world and there is no good or bad. There's no absolute good or bad. Everything is relative, and you can just go on and do whatever you feel like is good, right? It just becomes your own choice and becomes your own, it becomes the product of your own brain, right? Whereas if you do believe in the existence, then you would think, okay, what are the rules or what are the laws of nature that are governing me or that I should be following so that I am not a source of displeasure for that being, right? Number two, it affects your purpose in life and your destiny. So let's say if you were born yourself and there is no independent being, then what is really the purpose? Like, you were just born for no reason, and you're just here to eat, sleep, do work, and is that the purpose of life, or is there no purpose of life, right? So these are some of the things um, that will have a large impact on. Number four, determines the source of your morality. Again, your moral compass. Do you want to do a certain thing because it feels good, or do you want to do it because it has been mandated, it has been made obligatory by some super being there, right? And the last one is, if there is an alternate dimension where there is a real heaven and real hell, then you will want to make sure that you choose heaven. Obviously, if there are two things that are actually existing, if you do believe that, then you would definitely want to go with the option of heaven, right? And how do you get to that is there will definitely be some rules and some criteria that you would like to learn and then follow. But if you don't, then there's no contest for you, and you can uh, you probably don't even want to learn what is the criteria or not, because you don't believe in that existence. So anyways, I will start off with the verse of Quran. It's chapter number 30 and verse number 8 of the Quran. I'll have the Arabic read here, and then we'll go over the translation shortly after. Perfect. So I think the reason that I actually displayed this verse is hopefully is obvious. It basically talks about the importance of contemplation, the importance of doing zikr and then thinking about it, reflecting on it. So basically, Allah Ta'ala mentioned is, I'm going to read the translation again, chapter number 30, verse number 8. Do they not contemplate within themselves? Allah has not created the heavens and the earth and what is between them, except in truth and um, for a specified term. And indeed, many of the people in the meeting with their Lord are disbelievers. So, Alhamdulillah, Allah Ta'ala is basically saying that all the things around us is a source of contemplation for us. It's a food for thought for us. It depends on us whether or not we're pondering. Allah Ta'ala has made those things, made those creations for us to actually ponder upon and see what do they signify. Um, and then he also goes on to say that many of the people who will be returning to him in the day of judgment will be disbelievers. So he's basically telling uh, us all and suggesting that those people probably would not have had a chance to either ponder, or they just did not care enough to ponder upon those things, what they were signifying. So it's important, and unless we have that logical framework, because our mind is logical, we usually like to think logically. If something doesn't make sense, we don't really want to accept that, and that is totally reasonable. It's totally justified. We should only believe things which are logical. So we're trying to, when someone says, "Oh, you believe in something which is in ghaiba, which you haven't seen through your eyes," how is that even possible? How is that even logical, right? So that's why we're trying to build this framework that can illuminate our eyes, and we can decide for ourselves whether or not we want to believe in the existence there. So this is how we are going to follow this is how we want to build our framework. We are trying to understand beings, the existence of beings, right? So we need first of all, we need a way to actually classify them. So there is a need for classification. Why is that necessary? We'll cover that later. And then we will start with the simplest form of classification, which is true or false, one or zero, otherwise known as binary classification. And then number three, we'll go on with the possibilities. If there are, let's say, if we classify beings into two, which is binary classification, what are the possibilities of their existence? Can both of them exist together? Can one of them exist together, and whatnot, right? So we'll discuss that. And then we'll try to see what can be proved and what cannot be proved. So out of those possibilities that we have, what are some of the things that we can actually prove, and what are the things that we cannot prove? Things that we can actually prove through, let's say, logical conclusions, inferences, and mathematical principles, then we should not say that we cannot believe. But if we are able to prove them, then I think it would be very, very easy for us, and our brain will also accept that this is some sort of a rational approach to either believe or disbelieve in the existence of a of an independent being, let's say. So we'll start off with the need of classification or taxonomy. Why do we really need to do it? So whenever in philosophy, whenever we're trying to understand or trying to learn about a certain concept, we try to classify. For example, if we are trying to learn um, a material, let's say. So we classify them into metals and non-metals, right? Um, so that's just an example of binary classification. Let's say we are trying to learn plants. So there could be any two types of plants. There could be, let's say, green plants, and there could be plants that are not green. That's another form of binary classification. The other way could be, let's say, there are roses. Now, roses have multiple classes and types, right? So one could be a white rose, a yellow rose, or things like that. But obviously, if there are more types, you will have to associate properties to each of those types so that you can actually be able to recognize and distinctly identify all of those types. So, and if you are able to do so, then that means those classes are complete in their definition. And what, like I said, so basically, grouping objects into one class, it helps us understand the properties and characteristics of that class. And we can actually say, oh, okay, if you come across another object of similar qualities, you can easily say, oh, we've already studied that group, so that person or that object belongs to that group, and we can enhance our understanding through that way. So now so now we understand why we want to do the classic taxonomy, or why do we want to do the classification or taxonomy. Let's see why we want to do or go ahead with the simplest classification. Obviously, we can go with as many classifications as we want, but the easiest one would be binary, which means 1 or 0. Another example would be, this thing is true or false. It's binary classification. Or we can say, let's say we have an object A, the other object could be inverse of A. So it's the simplest, right? So if only we can identify or define properties or characteristics of an object A, we can simply say by virtue of using binary classification, we can simply say that, okay, A inverse is the complete opposite of A. So we don't even need to identify the properties. You can just say it's the opposite. So whatever A has is not to be the characteristics of A inverse. And I put some mathematical equations there too. Those are like pretty simple, and they're axioms. You don't have to like worry if you don't have that background, but just for people who are in STEM, they can actually know like A union A inverse is basically the entire population. So like, let's say if there is an A, this is basically from set theory. And what it's trying to tell you is that if A is an object that exists in population, then combine it with everything that is not A will give you the entire population. And that would mean that if you can understand A and A inverse, then that means you have been able to understand the entire population. And the second axiom, which says A intersection A inverse, basically means what is the commonality between A and A inverse? It's 0. So there should be nothing that is common between these two objects. They should be mutually exclusive. Um, Now I know this is a little heavy because it does include some mathematical concept, but for our understanding and for our study of the existence of God, or of an independent being, we can simply say, okay, we want to know whether or not beings like us, beings like creatures or creations, are independent or dependent. So contingent or independent, autonomous. And how can we define them? I will go on, but this is the base. This is really the basis for our discussion today. And we can actually define the attributes of how we want to classify objects into one category over other. So for dependent beings, we can say that we are dependent beings. And now just think of yourself and think what attributes you can actually put up there. So we are needy. So what do you mean? What do you mean by needy? We have our wants and desires. We need food. We need water. We need oxygen to breathe and live. So we are needy beings, right? The second one is that we are created. We did not create ourselves. Someone else actually had to create ourselves to bring us to this world. So that's an attribute that we have as well. we can be destroyed, right? That can come to us, and we can be destroyed, and so that's one of our attributes as well. Matter, we're obviously matter. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then time and space, we are actually limited, or we live in time and space. We have a certain definition of time and space. We are actually dependent on that definition as well. So that's, I guess that was the hard part, right? We've been able to define ourselves, and we can put ourselves easily into the category of dependent beings. Um, the other category, because this is a binary classification, we simply say the other category would be the inverse of whatever we said was dependent being, right? So we can just say the inverse of dependent being would be independent being or beings. Like, we don't know whether it's multiple, singular, or however many they are, right? We can simply say whatever the dependent beings are uh, is not the quality or characteristics of an independent being. So independent being should not be needy of food or water. They should not be sleeping at night and created. They should not have been created. They should always exist, right? They should not never be destroyed. They should not be made up of matter, and they should not be restricted or bound by time and space, right? So just these five categories, there's these five characteristics we have for dependent beings. We can actually say that these independent beings have do not have them. So moving forward, we will be talking about the possibilities. So now we have been able to classify objects or beings into two groups, independent and dependent. What could be the possibility of them being in existence? Can they both exist? Can only one of them exist, or both cannot exist? So what could be the possibility? And this is strictly from a logical perspective. So let's say this is a table, it's called the truth table that we have. What could be the possibilities? Well, the first one, which says dependent 0 and then independent 0, this simply means that both of them do not exist, like, right? So we will see whether it's true or not. The other one is dependent exist, but the independent does not. This is a possibility, right? This could happen. And then the third one is, okay, dependent does not exist, but independent exists, right? Could be vice versa. And then last but not least is that both of them exist. So, and we will analyze, there's no other fifth possibility. If we are classifying objects into two groups, then these are the only four possibilities that actually can happen. There could be no other possibility. So let's go one by one, or which to basically over these possibilities to see whether they are true or not. I'm going to start off with the first one and call this section as proofs. So dependence being exists or not, independent being exists or not. That's the first question, right? So if you go back to this table, the first possibility is they do not exist. So if you're able to say, okay, one of them exists, then we can actually cross this one out. And actually, it's fairly simple to nullify this hypothesis. So just ask yourself this question. So we're trying to figure out whether dependent beings exist or not. Now, we are dependent beings. We already defined our existence through by looking at ourselves, right? So do we know that we exist or not? We do know that we exist. That's why we actually were able to generate our characteristics, our properties, our attributes. So do you exist? I mean, most people say yes, we do, and it's fairly easy because we can see ourselves, we can feel, we are in this world, others can feel our presence, so we exist. So right away we can go to this table and we can say wherever the dependent beings says 0, we can actually cross that one out, right? So dependent being 0, so 1 and 3 seems to be false already. So we can simply say now we're only left with the point number 2 and point number 4, because we already said that dependence being definitive. So the question is really whether or not an independent being exists or not, right? So that's the only question. So fairly easy. Um, or we can actually ask this question in a different way. We're trying to, so we've already answered the question whether or not dependent beings exist or not, and we're saying, well, because we can figure out presence, they do exist. Now, the other question is whether independent beings exist or not, or the question it could be, uh, I can frame this question a different way as well. I can say, oh, can dependent beings, so we know that dependent beings exist, can they exist without an independent being, right? That's another way of saying whether or not independent beings exist or not. Because if we can prove that there is no existence possible for dependent beings without an independent being, then that means our existence will actually necessitate the existence of a dependent being. So we can do a quick example. So consider like 5 people who have to actually start a race. And let's say that no one will actually start the race until the person next to him begins it. So let's say person 1 wants to start the race, but he's actually waiting on person 2. And then person 2 is actually waiting on person 3. Person 3 is waiting on person 4, and then 5, and person 6. So if everyone is actually waiting on the next person, would the race ever start? So let's say in this case, these are dependent beings, right? In this example, these are dependent beings and they are depending on each other for the race to begin. Will the race ever start? So person 1 is waiting for person 2, person 2 is waiting for person 3, person 4 for 5, person 6 for 5. But when is person 6 gonna start the race? So let's say person 6 is waiting on person 1. That is one possibility. If that's the case, then the race will never start because person 6 is actually waiting on person 1, and person 1 is actually again doing a circular loop, and there will be an endless loop. There will be an infinite wait time for the race to start. The other thing could be that person 6 uh, actually is waiting on another person, who's person 7, and then person 7 is waiting on person 8, and the chain is never ending. There could be only 2 conditions, right? There could be either a circular chain, a circular relationship, or there could be a linear relationship, and the person 6 is also depending on another person to start the race. So in both the cases, the race is not going to start unless what happens usually is there's always an independent person who is independent from this chain, who actually initiates the race, or if such a condition is there, then he will initiate. For example, in a race or a marathon, there is always an individual who is outside the racing zone, who will actually announce that, okay, the race starts now. And so basically we can say that person is independent of the limitations of these dependent beings. Uh, so through this example, I know it's a little crude, but we will do some more examples, but we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that we do take this concept home, or this concept of independent and independent framework, and we can actually build our understanding more on that inshallah next week. But for today, I just try to understand this framework where we are actually classifying objects or beings into 2 categories. We have defined attributes for one category, and then we are saying that the other category would have an inverse relationship with that classification. And then we are saying that there can only be 4 possibilities that can exist, and by feeling our existence, we are saying 2 of them can be canceled out, and there are only 2 remaining. The other 2 remaining simply states that obviously dependent beings exist, but it's now only a question of whether or not an independent being exists or not. And we tried to reframe the question as well in a different way, and we said, can we rephrase it? Can we say that, okay, since you already know dependent beings exist, can dependent beings exist without the existence of an independent being. So if you can actually answer that question, we can also prove that dependent beings exist. So we will actually start off with that next week. I will leave that proof for next week, and we'll see um, whether we are able to logically convince ourselves that that is the case or not. Again, thank you so much for joining. This concludes our lecture number 4 for our Ramadan series. I hope to see you next week. Until then, please take care of yourself, and Allah Hafiz.